And our proposal as the DA is aimed at forming a basis for a national conversation, national discussion, and debate and dialogue on the future of Uganda. And note, these are our objectives. Other people can add theirs, but these are our objectives. They are essentially 6 in propagating the idea of a national transition and reform processes. The reform processes we have talked about variously. It involves reforming a number of laws, including amending the national constitution. But to break down the principal 6 objectives: 1, to ensure key constitutional, electoral, and administrative reforms that should be effected before the next general election. Our intention is to make sure that before the next general election, potentially in January next year, we undertake critical legal or critical constitutional and political reforms before we are enthusiastic about participating in the next election. And I'll expound more on what that is about. 2, to ensure the conduct of non-violent, free, fair, credible, verifiable, and consequential elections. Some electoral processes are actually being inconsequential. I'll give you an example. For the bulk of the last elections in which I've been active, call them probably 6 of them, the only consequential outcome has only been limited to local governments and parliament. The presidency has been insulated from any consequence. That's why the media will say the incoming is the outgoing is actually the incoming. So there's no conversation as to the possibility. Say, what if the incumbent collapses in an election? What happens? So what if the incumbent is thoroughly defeated without an iota of doubt and he hangs on? What happens? So we want a conversation because we want to have an idea of what looks like a free, fair, credible, and verifiable elections. You remember in the last 3 elections, Dr. Kizza Besigye was consistent in saying, if you think I lost, can we go ahead and verify and authenticate the nature of my loss? Can we go ahead and authenticate the nature of my opponent's victory? That has never happened. So we are saying, before we go into the next election, there must be a framework capable of providing verification for the consequences or the outcomes of an election. 3, to buttress mechanisms that guarantee peaceful and smooth transfer of power from one leader to another. Apparently, there's no such mechanism because we do not have a Presidential Transition Act. We don't have a mechanism that guarantees what happens to those who leave power. People hang on to power sometimes because they fear that there's no framework to insulate them from the crimes they have committed while in power. We want to have an arrangement of guarantees, an arrangement of ensuring that those who leave power actually don't leave the country. So if they have committed crimes against the citizens, there must be a framework of understanding the nature of crimes. Are they crimes in personam? Are they state crimes? So where's the framework? 4, to campaign for the implementation of a national reconciliation and reparation plan. Gentlemen and ladies, so much has been going on over the last 40 years under the leadership of General Museveni and his people. We surely know that there are so many injured citizens. There are so many affected citizens. And somehow, the political actors believe that they can be ignored. We don't think so. A nation that ignores the injured is a nation of fools. I don't think we are. We cannot afford the luxury of ignoring citizens that have been injured over time. So what will happen to citizens whose children have disappeared under the auspices of General Museveni and his people? Should we simply say they melted away like ice? So we need a framework of truth-telling so that the country can heal from the effects, from the ravages of bad governance as we usher in a new epoch of leadership that appreciates the values of our people, that appreciates the values of human rights, the values of association and disagreement. So it's our belief that this is lacking. That's why disagreements make people get gray hair, because there is no framework for resolving them. If you disagree, you take the fastest flight when a regime changes. We cannot build a nation that kind of got term limit in our view. You control both the young and the old. But a conversation as to the return of age limit is important. Let's have it and then see whether we need both or one of them. So mere dismissing either all, for me, is an act of cowardice. If we want to change this country, leaders, political leaders and actors and pretenders must at least have the courage to speak about very controversial issues, including the ones I've mentioned. But simply running away from them and saying, no, that's not possible. No, for us, we're just ready for an election. Which election? So we would like to invite serious political leaders to rise to the occasion, run away from their cowardice, and speak about these issues with courage. That these are the issues that we need to see be acted upon in these times. I talked about the critical amendments in the executive, dropping a vice president to go for deputy president. I talked about those issues hitherto. I don't want to bore you with that conversation. I talked about the downsizing of parliament from the current bloated 550, 59 or thereabout, to reduce the size of parliament by a third. Can we have that conversation? Is there any sane citizen who can say that that parliament can even be enlarged? In the current framework, actually, we are destined to expand the size of parliament by an extra 50 MPs. I want to inform the country that there is an ongoing process to enlarge parliament with an additional 50 members of parliament.
Sure.
For me, that's a crime against citizens.
Shame.
So can we have a national conversation as to how this parliament can be downsized? So when we discuss devolution, we cannot be discussing devolution and expansion in the same statement. Okay? We agree. If we want to devolve, then we must have some MPs can become councillors in their areas and influence local issues. I'm not trying to really downplay their quality. No. You are not any less of quality because you're a councillor. You're a leader of your people. Some MPs can become governors of their communities. Who knows that is guaranteed is going to be in the next parliament? So I'm speaking generally about myself and everyone else. That is the courage we need from our leaders. Not simply, appetite to participate in elections regardless of their consequences. Time must come when we, without contradiction, speak about the possibilities and the impossibilities. So I am now telling you that if nothing is done, the next parliament will be 600 and more. Remember, the structure of our economy is increasingly becoming narrow and narrow. So we have increasingly more mouths to feed and a lot more appetite than the resources at our disposal. So must we expand, political offices, or we need to really expand the framework for service provision in the country. So I have mentioned the acts I have put before Parliament, including the Presidential Elections Act for amendment, the Parliamentary Elections Act for amendment, the Law Government Act for amendment, the Political Parties and other organizations Act for amendment. Critically, what we are targeting as the DA in the Political Parties Act, the way it was framed, it was actually enacted in bad faith. Political parties, for example, are almost incapable of forming a registered coalition. I have had comrades in the other political platforms talk about their willingness to work with the others. You cannot register that kind of arrangement. We are probably the only nation that is incapable of responding to citizen concerns for over 20 years. There are so many lingering questions that require citizens to answer back. By the way, including the question that General Museveni wants to make a person like bail. If he has issues with bail, let him take the question to the people. They will answer him back. You have problems with bond. Let him go to the citizens who are affected by the inefficiencies of government. How can you say you want to do away with the bond when you don't have prosecutors? When you don't have magistrates? Who speaks about that? So I think General Museveni is tired, real tired. Let him take that question to the people through a referendum. He will get the answer he wants. So, we are alive to time. In 261, we can amend the constitution as parliament 2/3 and local government 2/3. That time we have. Parliament has enough time with local governments to amend those areas that require parliament and local governments. Then in 262, parliament alone, the area that require parliament alone. So parliament has time. It's only clumsiness and ill will. So if goodwill prevails, the question of time is not a big issue for all the intended amendments. It has for some, but we also have a remedy in terms of cascading them. And then the outcomes can be implemented by the next government. I'm strictly talking about governance.